Wrong way. See it?
Yes.
That's all I did. Was I installed DNSMask and I added that line to its configuration, and all it means is if you have a query for .console, go to port 8600 on localhost, because I have the agent for console installed on the server, and that's where it responds to DNS. So the DNS interface is extremely useful, like I said, because you can use it to insert console into existing legacy, infrastructure. If you have applications that aren't, agents.console aware, you do this, and then they can now resolve console hosts. So like, I work a lot with what we call slaying the monolith, right? You've got really old legacy ugly mainframe monoliths, and you've got all this new microservice DevOps stuff. I work a lot with what we call slaying the monolith, right? You've got really old legacy ugly mainframe monoliths, and you've got all this new microservice DevOps stuff. How do you make the two coexist, right? So this is one way, is you split your DNS so that if the mainframe calls, API.service.console, that's how it knows how to find it. Make sense? We'll back up that demo thing. And that's my LinkedIn, and check it out, A Stack of Rocks.
Does that mean you're well balanced?
No. Ben will attest I'm actually not well.
Are you on Twitter?
No, because the world doesn't need to know my opinions.
The world would be a better place. God bless you.
But I dig this stuff. I mean, if you got any questions, tell me.
So just, like I said, just to move back, if I try to relate your slide 24 back to your blue and yellows.
Yeah.
Right? Is the server, or
Here?
green, the blue and green, exactly.
No,
So
yeah.
is the server, that's little server entry is your blue, and then the server and the client agent is your greens?
Pretty much, but it's a little more complicated than that, right? So because the blue is the key value store. Think of it abstractly. It's a logical entity, right? The green is my application servers, but my application servers are also part of the console cluster. They are members. So the green is, you could also say the green is also part of blue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like in your demo, the demo, what you call demo was the blue guy, right?
No, in
Or was the config only?
The green, by that definition, the one I call console, that's the green one.
Oh, that's okay.
But because of the gossip, right? That's really kind of the power, is you put it everywhere. Like, so for example, when I showed that DNS split, that's localhost. That means that server doesn't need anything else to find those things. It's calling itself. So like your resolution records, they're called on your app server. If it's missing something, it will gossip back to the cluster to get what it's missing.
I can see one advantage of combining all of the all of the end variables in one place is then, like, even if I have like this microservice and its endpoint is whatever, and it needs to know its own endpoint, I can ask my other applications that need to use that microservice can ask that block of configuration. So I truly have the name of a thing or the setting of a thing in one place.
Yeah.
Where traditionally you'd have, environment variables spread across the cluster. Maybe you're managing it at the cluster level, like you have some solution for repping it out to all the different servers, but you're having to copy a lot of configuration in a microservice world so that it knows where the other apps are.
True. Now, I mean, don't get caught with the I'm gonna take one installation and say, this is my dev value, this is my QA value, this is my prod value.
Oh no.
Again, now you create environment keys, and you want to get away from environment keys. You want the environment to resolve its own values.
Right.
But like the principal use case, like for federation, I talked about how I was using it, right? But probably what console really meant for federation is, let's pretend you have two productions, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, right? Services on the East Coast come up and register in the East Coast console. Services on the West Coast register in the West Coast console, but they're federated. So if there are no services available in the East Coast console, you'll still get an answer. You just get it from the West Coast console.
Right.
Yeah. I was hoping to simplify this, right? I might not have, right? But it's actually probably one of the easiest DevOps tools to onboard. It's absolutely simple to create a console cluster and start consuming.
You could have kept those kind of values into kind of let's say it's a document template, like an Excel doc, something like that. So, and you can ask some agent to go and fill it with a predefined set of values or a pre-generators, and those documents can be pulled in, tied to any kind of tag level environment.
Yeah.
Tag level account.
Use cases is really limitless because since they're encoding all the data, you can put whatever you want in there. And I've never seen a size limitation. I've seen huge blobs come out of console.
In key value store means it's 512 MB is the size maximum.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but that's a huge blob of data.
It's a whole bunch of INI files thrown in there. A whole 250 sections.
Just to make sure that I understood what it is. So you have, let's say for QA, okay, so you have a QA, you have dev QA pre-prod production. So you're going to have one glue which will have all the set, the one that are constant across those four environments.
Correct.
And then you will have 4 of those files that you showed us that defines for dev QA the few that are not constant.
No, he said QA could also be QA 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I'm not going to do that.
It could be. So
But I mean,
when we look here, right, and again, I use the UI because it's an easy way to visualize this, right? The blue, right? Just this is a console data center, right? This screen right here, right? And right here is the username for a database connection. Actually, let's look at password instead because it's really secure. So this is the password for that database connection. You take this screen and you replicate it 6 times, or however many times, one in dev, one in QA, one in prod, or one in app 1, app 2, app 3, app 4, whatever your kind of your ecosystem structure is, right? And then when your application comes alive and says, I need my DB password, it goes and asks the key value store, its environment, specific key value store for the password, it gets back this value. But when you move that application to QA, it calls console, and instead of this value, it gets back
whatever
that value, right? So your application just knows I have to go get a value. It just doesn't know or care what it gets back.
So then where you have the demo drop down, could I have dev QA staging, or that's too big?
Depends ever how you want to federate, right? I would say with federation, you have to decide sort of what your, I'm not going to say security, right? But what your Chinese walls are, right? So for instance, in prod, would you want a prod agent to have the ability to see QA data?
No.
Vice versa. Would you want a dev agent to have the ability to see prod data?
No.
Probably not, right? So that would not be how I would federate. I would federate with multiple dev environments, or maybe all of non-prod. Like for example, that's what I've done. All of non-prod, all my dev environments are federated. All of my QA environments are federated, but they're not together.
Right.
You don't mix them, you're saying.
Yeah.
Right. You're segregating.
So where you have your pointer resting, where it says demo, that is
What does that represent?
That's federation.
But that's federation. But
Like that's the,
what's this data? It represents a data set or context?
Actually, let me, we were talking about the blues and yellows, right? So,
I mean, where do you define those?
so that screen right there, right? That drop down is if I told all of those blue boxes about each other, like geographical awareness. If I told them, hey, you're allowed to use each other, right? So then although the dev, environment, dev one, for example, has its own values, from dev one, you can
but
query dev
like
two.
you're speaking in global terms though.
I
Like you have to go one notch down. So in a typical environment where you have dev, QA, prod, right, or whatever it is, you could say that data center thing is equal to those, and then your console, you have essentially a console per environment. It's just that big financial companies, they don't see the world that way anymore. They're like the next world, like, so they're thinking like, maybe we don't want to do that because we have dev on we have prod on the West Coast, the East Coast, London, like, so they can't think of it in that like bifurcated term or that separation that most of us would. I would have a console in each environment because I think of dev, UAT, and then prod as separate environments, almost like separate data centers. I could do that up to the point where I have like a global initiative where I have multiple prods, then it becomes a little different. Now I'm going to organize it a different way. So I would say like the typical one is to think of like each environment as totally its own environment. That's kind of the way that we did the Terraform demo last year. But then you go to that next level where there's multiples, so that you may want across all your prods, you may want that to be federated so that prods are really a collection of separate environments. You see what I'm saying? It's like we get into this, what is an environment?
That's actually
for a global company, it's a lot different than.
That's actually a good word, the collection of multiple environments, right? So
I
that's
think probably from a GPD or whatever this is, data regulation point of view.
Yeah.
All those things has to stay there, even though it's a global financial company.
That's right.
Japanese content and rules.
Sure.
Should leave it.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
so you're calling it an environment. I was calling it context, but I mean, I understand where you would have the same keys amongst all the environments. The values could be different.
right.
From environment to environment.
Right.
But that makes it where you can transport your app from one environment to
Correct.
another,
Right.
even though the values will be different.
Right.
It's no different from a configuration file when you
Yeah.
launch.
It's a config file.
So I thought I'd throw this up there. So we saw kind of in my inside of PuTTY and inside the presentation, how you kind of create a cluster with that retry join command. This is the other command that I didn't show. It's basically how you create the federation. So the top one is joining your actual local cluster, and the bottom one is joining an extended family. And these are kind of common.
Look, these go,
Yeah.
Okay.
On the top one, I'm looking for a tag, which I showed before in this particular case. I'm looking for a CloudFormation stack tag. On the bottom one, I'm looking for a tag that I've defined. So every environment that I spun up, I put federation on, and when it finds anything else that matches the same federation, it joins them.
What is the COAF?
Capital One Auto Finance.
So, but I'm saying, I don't see anything in here that indicates like a stage, like a QA dev, anything like that.
That's what federation actually equals.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is your environment, whatever that.
So this is actually from my Capital One stack, right? So in this, federation is populated with dev, and I have 8 dev environments, and they're all federated.
What populates that?
That's a Terraform value. Yeah. So these servers are created with Terraform. So
Is it like 8 regions, like Canada or US?
No. All of my dev environments are in one VPC in one place.
Okay.
So then why are you calling them an environment? Because they're clusters?
They're
different lines.
They're,
Subnet-
business,
they're
subnet?
contextual. They're different lines of business. They're different.
Okay.
Even though, okay, mortgage is different from consumer finance.
So is it,
auto
do you
finance.
do you separate those as subnets then?
No.
No, they're just all there?
It's just a logical grouping of servers.
Okay.
One VPC.
Well, each line of business can put money, so that's where.
Yeah.
Right. That's much more from that account management, who pays for what?
It's actually more of the dev teams are conflicting with one another, running over each other, breaking stuff. So they make a new environment and they're all duplicates of each other and they're
Right. But you have essentially one console for each environment.
For dev, I have one console. No, I'm sorry. No, for dev, I have
Do you
eight
have,
consoles.
do you have like a manager VPC that can see dev, QA?
No. So we have one called Dev1, right? It's the dev environment, right? It is a console installation because the servers in Dev1, they only need Dev1 answers,
That's right.
right? I have a Dev2, and there is a Dev2 console installation because the servers in Dev2 only need Dev2 answers.
Got it.
But I have federated them into a federation I call Dev, so that if you connect to Dev1's API and name a data center, you can call back Dev2's values. It's more from an
Does
administrator.
anybody do
Yeah,
that?
that means.
Yeah,
the application.
Admin role.
Not in the app, but for debugging,
Sysadmin.
troubleshooting, sysadmin stuff, yes.
Okay.
Like for instance, when we populate values into Jenkins,
No matter where you are, you can tell what the other guys have.
well, we don't have to like, oh, which endpoint am I calling? You just have to remember what data center to call.
Got it. And then in your like drop down in the UI, what do you see there?
Dev1, Dev2, Dev3, Dev4, Dev5, Dev6, Dev7, Dev8.
Okay.
And then in a different federation, let's see QA1, QA2, QA3, QA4.
Oh, cool. Did
So
that help?
have
Did
you,
that help?
Does that make sense?
That helped me.
have you play around with,
Yeah, it's actually, one second. It's actually sort of funny because in Capital One, we have sort of a really funny construct of what we call an environment. And so when I start to say the words environment, it's completely subjective, means totally different things.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah.
No, when you say environment means they're talking from Python and then virtual environment is the viewpoint they have.
Say that again?
Virtual environments in Python.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean.
No, not at all.
Yeah, not at all.
Okay.
So, DevOps. Okay. So let's suppose I have 30 applications in the development environment,
Uh-huh.
and just for the simplicity, one app is equal to one machine, like,
Uh-huh.
So we are saying that we have one configuration file where we have all the configurations related to those 30 apps at one place.
Correct.
And then, so it's basically principally like, finding the pros and cons between having multiple configuration files versus one configuration. So that's one huge file, right? From, again, maintenance and scalability point of view.
Well, calling it a file is arbitrary because it's not a file. It's a
service.
Right, it's a service.
Oh,
I mean, really, what we've done is we've abstracted that file
Mhm.
into the environment. It's now infrastructure.
Right.
It's now infrastructure that you place those values in.
Key value collection becomes a particular environment, a collection of key values.
Like and I'm speaking hypothetically, but in my company, my new company, before I hire developers, I'm going to create the environments and I'm going to have console servers there. And they're part of the infrastructure. It's essentially, and actually in my presentation, there was a conversation that I used to have, and I just forgot about it, but back in 1980 something, right? When when a bunch of colleges were working on ARPANET, right? They had IP addresses. Actually, they probably didn't have MAC addresses, right? But they had IP addresses. And at some point they said, you know what? It's really hard to remember these numbers. So then they made host files. And host files worked for a little while. And then they said, you know what? It's really hard to move these host files around. So then someone sat down and created DNS, right? It's just in the app space, DNS is now unscalable, right? There's too much change. So what we're doing, what console is, or what this key value or service discovery is is think of it like a new DNS for an application environment. It's part of the infrastructure. I don't consider it an application piece. The developers don't touch it, they just populate it with values.
It's a infrastructure services to cater to all
Right,
the
exactly.
community.
You are looking at from the file point of view, but you're looking at
Yeah.
service. One place.
They will do for any of those
Because those files get completely unruly, it's now an infrastructure piece and the developers can't make those files anymore.
I think it was, if I could talk about a progression, maybe an ugly one, but it started out where we had a file in our GitHub that had all the secrets on it. And then we said, well, we need different stuff for different environments. So we created folders to have those files in there. And we said, oh, then somebody came and told us like, no, those files aren't supposed to be in there at all. They're supposed to just stay on the server because that's more secure. Now they got on the server. Now system administrators like him had to go touch all the files to have the proper controls.
Yep.
Now these guys got smart and said, okay, forget about the files. They just don't exist. Now instead, just write these pieces of code in where you need to call that variable, and it's just always available there.
And it generates some services.
And one way you can.
And self-provision.
And then
Self-provision.
we were talking about Vault, same thing for secrets. I consider that an infrastructure piece. I build it. It's where you put your secrets. And if I had an empty dev environment, it would have a console installation and a Vault installation. And it's where key value, secrets, and services ever go. They're like the new DNS.
So what's the advantage of doing this instead of, say, we use Chef, something like Chef, right? You can pin down the environment on those servers. So, I mean.
So if you look in your Chef code, you probably have, you do have the environments. Like it looks like you have the stuff there, but all you did was move the file. So you moved the file
Or transform the file.
Into JSON.
from the server into there.
JSON.
Now they said like, don't worry about that. The Chef, like the infrastructure goes up, Chef could be used to configure the server. Now you're talking about the application, and then console is allowing the application to discover where it is, right? Chef is already done at that point, right? The server stood up, all the necessary things are installed. This is handling between the application and the infrastructure. Who am I? What should I be? What are my settings?
Yeah, and really, if I had to answer that question, it's really because, you know, I'd say Docker, right? Or containers or immutable servers. I don't want something changing my code after it's shipped. I want an artifact that I move that's immutable and unchanged. Yeah, so Chef Run, well, you know, hey, I like Chef, don't get me wrong, right? Chef Run is changing that code. That's what it does. It's doing it in a scripted, constructive way. And
let's face it, like Chef came in a time where we were just happy to make sure that we had the configuration of the server codified, right? We still weren't ready when Chef came around to destroy the server on every deploy. The HashiCorp world or the next generation is saying, when you deploy, that server comes from the same state. There's a state all the way through, configuration all the way through to the code, right? It's not the server, okay, I just keep running Chef and the server's moving and then, okay, code is coming in. It's like, okay, I deploy, this goes away, this becomes then. I deploy again, this goes away, right? So when we talk about immutability, we're talking about full destruction and creation on every life cycle, on every change. So when I want to say, well, what was here, I have a version all the way through. This is a little easier to picture with something like container, but it's also happening with server.
But even and I'd probably get fired, but so
You're not streaming.
we